We didn't have this part of life 100 years ago. Very, very few people lived to be old and frail. Now, most of us will. And we really need to build a care system that makes much more sense. How many people here are or have been married? Now, how many of you did this as a thoroughly rational choice with decision analysis? Oh, there are 3 who claim, 4 who claim a proper decision analysis. The rest of us are fully human and make our choices largely out of emotion, intuition, and habit and social cues. And that's a piece of what I'm going to try to get into here. A couple of years ago, number of years ago now, I was serving a nursing home, and a lady came to join us who was 96 years old. She arrived in florid congestive heart failure and nearly died that night. We did old-fashioned rotating tourniquets and hospice care, and she somehow managed to find a physiologic stability and lived for 2 more years. She was moderately demented as she arrived and severely demented by the time she died, but she loved to fold towels, and the aides would give her a big stack of towels. She would fold them. She would feel like she was contributing to the community. She got a lot of joy out of folding towels. The aides would go around behind, shake them all out, give her a new stack of towels, and she was delighted. And then one day she just sort of was off. She wasn't eating quite right. She sort of took to bed, didn't seem quite right. I came and examined her, didn't find anything terribly important, and the next day she died. So she had her autopsy, and a couple weeks later I sat down with the family to tell them what we'd found. What we had found was a bleeding gastric carcinoma. I mean, we all sat down and I told them about this finding, and the one daughter said in hostile anger, "How could you possibly have missed a cancer?" And the other daughter gently put her arm on the first daughter's arm and said, "You know, Mary, she couldn't have had a better life or a better dying. We would only have made her miserable." Isn't that true? How could we have done any better than what she had? 36 hours of what turned out to be serious illness and a gastric bleed. Not a bad way to go at 98 with substantial dementia. And enjoying every day folding towels, whatever turns you on. A few of us in the room are old enough to remember the revolution in obstetrics care. When I was in training in the early 1970s at Boston City Hospital, women still labored in a large room, unattended by anybody they knew. They were schnockered at the end. They met the baby somewhat later. There was no support for breastfeeding. It was a very much doctor-controlled endeavor. By the mid-1970s, that was anachronistic. Now, there were individual women who insisted upon doing it differently, and that was very important as a catalytic endeavor. But the big change was that by the end of the 70s, a woman who said absolutely nothing got just about the right thing. The habits had changed. The statements of the nurse, the statements of the janitor, the statements of the woman who delivers the food, all were different. They were all supportive of breastfeeding, of nurturing the baby, of being awake. We had changed the default in the system. End-of-life care has changed a lot since the 60s and 70s, when the big issue was pain and cancer and the ravages of radiation and chemotherapy. That was sort of what grabbed our attention. Now it's really mostly very old people living with substantial disability in communities that haven't learned to care. So what should we do? I've been working a long time now on frail elderly people. So we're working to make sure that those of us in the room, when we grow old and frail, and most of us will, how can we get through that part of life with meaningfulness and comfort without running up incredible bills? We are going to first recognize this part of life. We're going to build a care system that does individualized care plans, makes it possible for geriatric medicine to be supplied, especially at home, bring social services into the net as real services. And what's interesting is that at least for the next decade or so, in most parts of the country, you can fund the reform on the waste. Waste and low-value care in Medicare is just enormous. With a sweep of my pen, I can write for a $100,000 drug for my most demented nursing home patient. But I cannot get Meals on Wheels on a weekend. I can't get a substitute caregiver. I can't fix the fact that there's a 1-year wait for Meals on Wheels in Detroit. I think one other thing we've forgotten to do is that we've forgotten to get people angry. But I call on all of us to start telling people to start learning to complain, to remember to complain 6 months later when you're out of this, to go back and talk to the CEO, go back and talk to the chief medical officer, insist upon things happening better than they did for your mother. We really have to start getting people angry enough to carry the ball. Oh, we will eventually. The question is, will we do it by 2060 or by 2030? You know, if we do it by 2030, there'll be much less suffering and much less waste of funds. And if we wait until we've made mistakes for a few decades before we get around to doing it right, there'll be all that waste and all that suffering that we could have avoided.